So the first theory argument he makes is that I violated the semantical rules. Well, semantics are dependent on the definitions and the grammar of the resolution. So if I link in better to that, then I haven't violated any rules. His second argument is that I've debated ridiculous claims. Well, first, they aren't ridiculous if I give you some historical precedent or current day examples to go from. And second, in each of the examples I prove how it isn't simply done by a gross minority. It is done either by the implicit condoning of society, or it is done by the explicit or implicit action of the government. Then go to T. He says, I'm violating the resolution because I'm not linking into the idea of a political decision. Well, if you refer to the definitions of political, referring to aspects of a polity, obviously, and debate, referring to opposing sides within a polity over issues, policies, societal actions, or governmental actions. Nowhere in the resolution are we talking about a governmental decision. We're talking about the debate where it refers to actions or policies that will be implemented in the future. So I'm not violating T there. Then go to the NC. Go to the observational framework, number 1, the word any. He dropped this, but he tries to bring it back in his last speech. He says, I give you no impact to right or wrong. Well, I don't have to give you an independent impact to the ideas of right and wrong. I simply have to prove that through observational frameworks, it is important in the resolution itself, independent of other aspects of the resolution. So since I've proven that the definition of any means I need to only prove a minimum of one example, then it doesn't matter if I impact back to right or wrong, because that's a separate issue. So at this point, all I need to do is win one example. And remember, he dropped this, so see it as a concession anyway. Then go down to contention 1 of consequentialism. He first says I violate T, but remember I already responded to T. He tries to respond to the thought experiment analysis, which he dropped in his second speech, but he brings it up again, where he says it's irrelevant because probability doesn't matter. Well, the only way to test a policy option is to use probability, since we don't know specifically what the outcome is going to be. So comparatively, we have to say, is this evidence pointing to the fact that it is effective or ineffective, desirable, undesirable? So either way, you're going on probability. Then he tries to respond to the dropped Harrius evidence, which he says Harrius is contradictory. Well, a policy will have a better result one way or another. So Harrius is saying you have to use a probable mechanism to find what that is, because that's what a governmental obligation is for. A government obligation is to protect the people to its maximum possibility as possible. So since a government's obligation is first and foremost to the people, we have to ensure that the policies in which are being implemented have the best result as possible. And that's where probable means come from. And then he tries to, again, respond to the dropped Dworkin evidence, where he says Dworkin is talking about morality. Well, egalitarianism in this case is not morality. It's referring to governmental policy. That governmental policy has to reflect the notion that everyone within a society is fundamentally equal. And since everyone is fundamentally equal, governmental policies have to treat everyone the same, and we can't preclude anyone from a decision calculus. That is the fundamental notion that links into all of the independent scenarios. Since humanity is fundamentally equal, governmental policy has to reflect that, and that is the notion of where we get right and wrong from in the terms of the political debate, because we're talking about governmental obligation. So at this point, it's a clear vote for the negative already, because I've proven a consequential framework, which says that we can't preclude anyone on the fact that everyone is equal, and the government has to come up with the best policy as possible. So the biggest impact also for this is that it precludes all of the AC, because his AC is dependent on the fact that we aren't sure of the outcome now. Well, consequentialism says, well, we might not know the outcome now, but we have to use a probabilistic mechanism to prove, is this going to be the more effective policy or not? So it doesn't matter if there's long disputes, and it doesn't matter if people disagree about it. We simply have to look to the notion of consequentialism first. Then go down to contention 2. Clearly extends subpoints C, D, E, F, and G, which he doesn't even mention in his last speech. These are clear extensions of the negative, saying that these are implicit harms because they treat people fundamentally different. The sex trade, racism, exploitation of women, forms of the death penalty, and war rape. So already you can clearly vote negative again, because I've linked back to the resolution with these independent scenarios. But he tries to argue genocide, saying that it's not legally recognized. Well, it doesn't have to be legally recognized to be wrong. The genocide in Rwanda wasn't legally recognized until after X amount of people have already been killed. So just because some legal scholars debate the definition of genocide, and is Darfur part of the genocide, doesn't negate its potential for being a genocide. And even if we concede that it's not a genocide, it is still a crime against humanity, which is prosecutable under the ICC and the Rome Statute. So at that point, it is still violating the fundamental notion of human equality and using that as consequentialism. Then, so yeah, so you can vote off genocide there, that people are being killed and treated unequally within Darfur. Then go to contention 3 of fiscal responsibility. He says, well, he's proved it irrelevant because it leaves the other side out. But remember, fiscal responsibility was dropped in his second speech, so in debate, silence is consent, and since my opponent does know the rules of debate, like official debate, then he knows that by dropping it, he's conceded it. However, even if that wasn't the case, he clearly ignores the analysis that Foster gives you, which does include the other side, and shows how the other side is wrong, and how comparatively it isn't good for economics. Then he says it's just a rant of interest. Well, he brought up the rant about MLMs, so I would assume I could bring up a rant about fiscal responsibility. Insofar as that is true, and he has made no good argument against fiscal responsibility, we can say this is comparatively good for economics, which is one of the biggest societal differences and political differences, so I clearly link back to the resolution, and again, you can vote negative here, because I've proven comparative right. Oh, and that's an important thing. He says somewhere in the last speech that comparative and universal are the same. No, they're not. Comparative is talking about effectiveness. Universal is referring to there is no dichotomy, saying that it is one way. Well, it is a dichotomy. It's one way or another, but there aren't multiple oppositions within that. It is true no matter what. But since we both agree to an efficacy form of the definition of right, then we're referring to comparative right. So this is comparatively right. Fiscal responsibility is good. Then, go to the AC. Okay, contention 1 of effectiveness. He says, I'm just trying to confuse you, talking about mutuality and non-mutuality. Well, I'm arguing that since he sets up the dichotomy of non-mutual and mutual, then he's implicitly conceding that there is a non-mutual part to it, which means that there are right and wrong answers. But then extend the argument I made about the thought experiment, which links back to consequentialism. And then, extend the argument I made in my last speech that debates exist while policies are being implemented today, so there is an effective way to measure policy being implemented already. And insofar as that is true, we can see which is the most effective policy, which links back to the definition of right. So insofar as that is true, that's another way to vote affirmative, because it's linking into a notion that you can weigh good versus bad, inefficient versus efficient, desirable versus undesirable. Then, again, extend the argument that unknown results don't negate the future result. This argument is saying that even though we might not know the result now, that doesn't negate the result in the future. The result is going to exist. We just don't know about it at this time. So insofar as that is true, at this point in history, there is a right or wrong answer comparatively. We just don't know about it in the debate. But there is one. We'll just find out in the future. He says he doesn't really understand what I'm talking about, but that's not a response, so you can extend that. Then go to contention 2 of long disputes. He talks about theories versus statistics, and then he was like, well, my example doesn't talk about statistics. Well, statistics and math is an important part of these theories, because they refer to, like, the circularity of different planets to prove is the sun or the earth the center of the solar system. But remember, even if that doesn't matter, I linked into economic debates, saying how there is a comparative right or wrong answer based off of statistical models. Then go to global warming. He was like, well, there's two different sides, but either global warming is anthropogenic or it isn't, so there is a right answer. We just don't know about it, so the right answer is the one that's more on par with science. And then go down to the economics debate, which I linked in through fiscal responsibility. So voters. Voter number 1 for the round is clearly coming from framework of consequentialism, since I proved that governments have an obligation to best provide for their people through efficient policy. Then contention 2, you can vote off of the extensions C, D, E, F, and G, which he didn't respond to in his last speech, and you can also vote off genocide, because I've proven that genocide is comparatively and definitively wrong, because it's treating people as fundamentally different and treating them as subhuman, which is wrong. Then vote off of contention 3, where he drops it and then he makes a bad response to it, which proves that fiscal responsibility through the Summers and Foster evidence is comparatively better, and then just use the kicks off the case, that his case doesn't really matter at this point. Thank you.